Our speaker is Cyntia Kálmánová from Selye University, Slovakia. Today, she presents her talk on the topic, The Intersection of Love and Intellectualism in Dark Academia.
Today, I would like to introduce the phenomenon of dark academia and more specifically to present the topic of the intersection of love and intellectualism in dark academia. My main aim is to explain and define dark academia as an aesthetic trend, a literary genre, and to explore the role of love as a complex concept that actually blurs the boundaries between intellectual and romantic attraction. In doing so, I would like to provide a comprehensive analysis of the urtext of the genre, namely The Secret History by Donna Tartt, with a particular focus on the role of love in shaping the novel's sense of fatalism. My main questions were whether there is a unique role for the concept of love in dark academia, and whether it's different when it's being projected onto the aesthetic version or a genre version of the phenomenon. Another important thing I was looking for are the different forms of love which are specific to the phenomenon. Dark academia, an aesthetic subculture, a social media trend, and literary genre often revolves around intellectualism, classical studies, existential musings, and romanticizing the quest for ultimate knowledge, a higher power achieved by the few. It is an aesthetic phenomenon that continues to be popularized for its picturesque representation of the academic, with a deep admiration towards an antique nostalgic sensibility. It first appeared on Tumblr in 2014 and has since conquered other image and video-centric platforms such as Instagram, Pinterest, and TikTok. Initially on Tumblr, the entire concept of dark academia began as a kind of visually pleasing representation of the academic mindset, a so-called mood board, a primarily aesthetic collection of bookish items to be shared, admired, or talked about. It is associated with the love and admiration towards pretty pictures of historic buildings, interiors of hidden Oxbridge campus libraries, autumnal foliage, ancient Greek and Roman sculptures, or typewriters, manuscripts on display, a fascination with all things academic. It also has a very important academic setting, a philosophy of the ancient classics, secret societies, and finding beauty in learning, literature, and the depths of intellectualism and existentialism. The role of love, especially in romantic and platonic forms, is integral to the aesthetic of dark academia, even if it's not a focal point within its context as a genre. In most works associated with dark academia, love is portrayed as both a state of mind and a sensibility. It's something very intense, complex, and often tragic. In this narrative, love serves as a tool, reflecting the genre's focus on intellectualism and the darker aspects of human experience, a destructive and motivational force. It creates a sense of obsession and superiority, almost like a catalyst for existential reflection, rather than just being a romantic attraction. Therefore, for those fascinated by the idealistic concept of dark academia, the phenomenon functions somewhat as a nostalgic return to the past. Consequently, love in dark academia is not always about romantic attachment. It can be also intellectual. For a clearer understanding, it is important to first look at dark academia as a phenomenon that initially emerged from a subcultural aesthetic trend. According to Horgan, Nguyen, and Milan, dark academia can be called as a fantasy of the university experience that many students felt they were forced by the pandemic to forego, or a collective nostalgia fantasy, a visual nostalgia and an aesthetic community that romanticizes studying and privileges the academic environment of an often elitist past, unquote. Love, therefore, in the aesthetic of dark academia evokes nostalgic senses, reflecting a thoughtful sadness, solitude, almost an idealized wasteland of emotions, which are important hallmarks of the phenomenon. The aesthetic is not merely about the sad, darkened tone, but it actually conjures a certain beauty present in the quiet melancholy and in the solitary academic longing. It is where dark academia's celebration of Greek philosophy, Romanticism, and the Gothic intertwine, embracing the adoration for learning and study. The following pictures found under the hashtag of dark academia perfectly capture its aesthetic vision. Candlelit study rooms or libraries, rain-soaked campuses, quiet Gothic towers, vintage academic attire, autumnal Oxbridge grounds, and of course the colors, faded burgundies, heavy blacks, browns and golds, they all represent its daydream-like essence. The Gothic element of pining or longing as a type of affectionate love is often illustrated through these visuals by showing characters in moments of solitude, walking through hallowed halls, gazing out of windows into stormy sky, or reading alone in a corner of an ancient hidden library. Even their outfits, tweed blazers, oversized jumpers and coats, turtlenecks and tortoiseshell glasses, they all reinforce the visuals of this mood, mimicking the fashion of literary figures or historical icons. On the other hand, other subtypes of this aesthetic subculture take on different qualities and expressions compared to the more brooding, melancholic tone of traditional dark academia. Light academia, for example, introduces a whimsical, brighter, more idealistic, and often more explicitly romantic take on the concept. Visually, light academia is all about the romantic settings and feelings, vintage literature, old-fashioned romance, grand landscapes, and of course its connection to the romantic ideals found in classical literature. Think of the passionate, often tragic love affairs in works by the Bronte sisters, for example, of a Byron and Keats. However, in the dark academia genre, within the ivory towers of academia, love is given a very unique role. These types of novels tend to offer an illusion of hope, and dark academia itself can be referred to, and I quote, as a classical antiquity itself, or something that exceptionalizes elite scholastic environments as much as it romanticizes them, unquote. Love, whether romantic or platonic, becomes a symbol in itself. It reflects the choices the characters make and shapes their growth and decline. To introduce this unique representation of love in the new genre of academia, I use close reading techniques to analyze the presence of love in the ur-text of the dark academia literary genre, namely Donna Tartt's The Secret History. I selected specific quotes from the book, focusing on the role of love in shaping the novels and the character's sense of fatalism. Readers of the dark academia books often share a form of admiration for the characters, a sense of longing to be part of their close-knit group, as well as the narrator of the story, who begins as an outsider, looking for ways to gain acceptance from the group. In The Secret History, Richard Papin is just as captivated by this enigmatic group of students at Hampden College as the reader is. However, Richard has an admiration for the group as a whole, but at the same time, he creates a separate fixation on each of the main characters. When Richard first learns about this small elite group of students who are learning and practicing ancient Greek language and philosophy, he becomes more and more interested. He also admits, and I quote, "I do not now, nor did I ever have anything in common with any of them, nothing except the knowledge of Greek and the year of my life I spent in their company. And if love is a thing held in common, I suppose we had that in common too." Unquote. The topic of love actually reappears quite often during their philosophical musings. In this passage, for example, the characters are talking about and discussing that what's the thing that hurts the most, what's the pain that often makes us most aware of the self. And they actually come to the conclusion that it might be love. And I quote, they think it's a cruel and terrible master. One loses oneself for the sake of the other, but in doing so becomes enslaved and miserable to the most capricious of all gods. Another philosophical idea that they are quite interested in is the question of beauty. They talk about, and I quote, that death is the mother of beauty, and then they ask that what is beauty then? They come to the conclusion that beauty is terror, but then they follow up with the question that what is desire? It is their professor, Julian, who actually says the following, and I quote, that we think we have many desires, but in fact we have only one. What is it? He asks. The rest of the group answers with to live, and it's actually Bunny who highlights that to live forever. This inspiration in the secret history, and in particular in the overall genre of dark academia as well, comes from classics such as tragedies by Shakespeare or Homer, from Dante's Inferno, or from the picture of Dorian Gray, often indulging in a kind of romanticism of unrequited love or forbidden romance, or of relationships that undeniably end in tragedy, a divine understanding of beauty and mortality. There is always a classical or ideological longing for beauty and knowledge, even in the form of love or affection. Most of the characters actually embody an image of an archetype, and in the dark academia narrative, it is very often the archetype of the tragic hero. Their fate is transformative, but often destructive, with a kind of love where passion and reason collide. Characters in this genre often grapple with who they are, what they desire, and what their place is in the world. Love, therefore, when depicted, functions as an obsessive emotion characterized by emotional unavailability and a sense of alienation. And this phenomenon manifests itself in the dark academia genre in various forms as well, such as forbidden or unrequited love, platonic or intellectual love, or devastating betrayal. Through the following quotations, I would like to introduce Richard's connection and relationship with the other characters in their secretive, close-knit group. He talks about them at first as highly unapproachable, as you can see, and later he was also confused by their sudden glare of attention. He actually compares them to a favorite painting where the characters who were absorbed in their own concerns had now suddenly looked up out of the canvas and spoken to him. He also highlights his love towards Greek language, Greek literature, philosophy, and the Greek class itself, talking about that this was the class that actually made him feel part of something because he felt like he was alienated in the real life world. This is, and I quote, why he admired Julian and Henry in particular, unquote, because they felt like that they were permanent residents in this new land of literature and philosophy, and he could be, in a way, part of their group, not just being an admiring tourist. He first bonds very easily with Francis, and they share a kind of teasing relationship, very sensual but very open, and it's based on a shared fascination with the intellectual and philosophical world, a sense of openness that's so hard to come by in their alienated social circles. There is a similar bond between Richard and Charles as well, based on a combination of emotional support, unspoken understanding, and attraction as well. In the case of Camilla, there is an undercurrent of romantic tension or even obsession, where she is overly sexualized or portrayed with a theme of forbidden love that goes beyond traditional boundaries. However, we have to be aware that this only exists through Richard's own perspective. For example, he refers to her as a tender apparition that only exists in his dreams. Or she is being referred to as, and I quote, a girl, a slight lovely girl, who lay in bed and ate chocolates, bewitching and clever, but at the same time the queen who finished out the suit of Dark Jacks, Dark King, and Joker, unquote. All these branches of admiration, relationships, and emotional extremes are intertwined in the fascination Richard feels for the so-called leader of the group, Henry Winter. It is this that can be seen as a form of intellectual love, an unreciprocated sense of longing that shapes Richard's obsession and fixation, making him almost mindlessly drink up all of Henry's words. It is based on Richard's admiration for Henry's charm, intelligence, and authority. And this is exactly the type of intellectual love that separates Bunny from the rest of the characters within their secretive group. Bunny was very similar to Richard in the aspect of being an outsider at first, but in a much different way. Richard's loyalty actually clashes with Bunny's status in the group, who at first loved being part of this elite rich clique of individuals, but in all honesty actually resented them and their shared superior yet unreasonable philosophical and obsessive views. He thought himself to be better, even if not intellectually, than the others in the group. And this was Bunny's betrayal of both the group and of Henry, and this is what sets the wheels in motion and leads to his fatal downfall. As an example, it is Bunny who says the following, and I quote, "Love doesn't conquer everything, and whoever thinks it does is a fool," unquote. This sentence actually foreshadows his exclusion from the group and his fatal end. In conclusion, the characters' love or dislike for each other and their ultimately hidden unreliability in the secret history is essentially part of this transformative and destructive energy that is so common in the Dark Academia narrative. It is this that leads the characters and their fate to tragedy. Love here is ultimately intertwined with manipulation, power struggles, and personal ambition, a state of flux. It is never simply portrayed as pure or innocent, but it rather focuses on the darkest side of human nature, representing Dark Academia's fascination with chaos and misery, intellectualism and existentialism, and how is love capable of driving individuals to emotional extremes. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention and time, and I will happily answer all your questions if you have any. Here are my references and the image sources. Thank you.